What's going on, everybody? Nick here, and today we are back on the Bahama 41. And I had someone in the comments of the Bahama 41 walkthrough video request that I can give performance numbers on the boat. And so I'm going to make a quick video about the performance of the Bahama 41, performance numbers. And obviously, performance numbers are not really something that, you know, I can run the boat and you get a feel for how you're going to be here. So kind of what I want to do, I'm going to run through just a quick overview of the different, factors on this boat that affect performance and my overall thoughts. And then I'm going to actually give you my personal numbers. What I did basically is I compiled a set of numbers for every level of trim. And so, for instance, I have at 2% trim, all four motors trimmed at 2%. I have all the data for 600 RPM, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000, 2,500, 3,000, and so on to 6,000. And then I did all that again at 4% trim, and then all that again at 6% trim, and then all that again at 8% trim, all the way to 20% trim. It took me quite a bit of time to do that, but I want to give you all the best information I possibly can. And to be honest, it's helpful for me too, because I really have never done a performance test this in depth on this boat, and so it is helpful. So the first thing I kind of want to go over is the factors that affect the performance. First and foremost is trim. The Bahama 41 is a boat that is extremely sensitive to trim. And when I say that, I mean, you can feel huge differences between 0%, 5%, 10%. Generally speaking, if I'm cruising anywhere from 4,000 to 4,500, I tend to keep it at 8%, which is pretty low. You can go higher, but I found that keeps the bow in the water just a little bit more, which I think the boat performs a little bit better. You're going to lose a little bit of economy, but I think the boat performs a lot better, rides a lot better at that trim level. And then of course, as you go faster, you can jack it up. My personal favorite fast cruise is around 4,800 to 5,000 RPM and sitting at 12ish percent trim, sometimes up to 14 if it's really nice out. And from my personal experience at that, I can sit right around 40 knots and getting 0.65 to 0.7 nautical miles per gallon depending on conditions. So yeah, there's that. Something I do want to address is we do have the Humphrey interceptor system, which is this. And basically that is an automatic trim system. So as I, speed the boat up, it automatically deploys the tabs to get that bow down so it jumps on the plane. For this test, I am going to be disabling that completely. I think it's better if I just give a performance test strictly based off of how the hull performs with the power we have, with none of the extra gimmicks that we have. And because of that, I just think it's more fair that way. And then obviously that's going to enhance the performance, not only getting up on plane, but when you're underway, when a head sea, you can stuff the bow, run quicker. Or if you're running super fast, the way that thing works, if you give it a shot of down trim, it kind of will lift the stern out of the water a little bit, and actually done correctly can somewhat improve your performance. So that's kind of between trim, that's off. So trim and the speed is really the only other thing that matters. I will say today is beautiful out. I'm in the interior of a lagoon. You can see the water, it does no waves, so it's going to be a complete, flat water accurate test. I'm putting the autopilot, set on one heading, and I'm not touching the wheel, so it's going to be a straight line speed and all that. So I guess without further ado, let me, get set up, get these numbers, and I will report back my performance to you guys. And something that I do want to mention is I know I'm getting exact trim numbers because if you look here, this is the screen I run with. I run it so I can see the individual trim of every motor. And I know a lot of people don't do that and they like to run off a feel, which most of the time I am running off a feel, but it's nice to be able to have that so I know exactly where they are and, pretty much get it down to a science. I think it's still very important to be able to run and be able to trim a boat with feel, but that makes it really easy because I know, in calm conditions, I can run this and I'm optimizing my economy at that speed. So I wanted to note that. So, these trim percentages are not eyeballed. They are exact. I don't think there's really much else to go over. So I add some running footage in here so you can kind of see the running attitude of the boat and everything while we go through the performance numbers. But let's get to it. And so I just finished doing my testing, and one thing that I did forget to mention before is that we did have a full tank of fuel, which is 560 gallons. So that's a lot of weight, and just me on board. That's the only weight on board. We have all of our gear we keep on the boat. The canvas covers, you know, life jacket, safety stuff, fishing stuff, all that's on me, and then full 560 gallons of fuel. And I did want to mention too that I ran out of time, and so I only went up to 14% trim, but I think that's an accurate representation because very rarely are you even going to go that high in this boat. Usually I'm running between 8 to 12 as the sweet spot. You know, if you want to get top end speed, you might jack it up to 14, 16, 18 maybe. But realistically, your range of operation is going to be between 8 to 12%. And so I think, you know, going up to 14 is good enough, and you can get an idea. You know, I think I topped out right around 51 knots at that 14% and at 5,800 RPM. Now, if you jack it up even further, you know, you're going to get the full 6,000 RPM and probably an extra couple knots. But realistically, no one is operating in that RPM range for much at all. And so I think that I got a real good representation of where most people are going to be running this boat. So there are a couple things that I want to go over before I show you guys the performance numbers that I got. And stick around because those are coming. I'm going to put them on the screen and kind of give an analysis of those numbers and what they mean. But the first thing I want to address is that I know there's going to be some people out there who say, oh, you know, the boat gets horrible economy, XYZ. I want to say you do not buy a 41-foot quad engine center console for economy. I don't care what boat it is. You're not getting a very economical cruise and performance with any quad engine center console, 40 feet or above. You buy it because it rides well, because it's comfortable, because it fishes well. The fit and finish is good. That's why you buy this boat. You're not buying this boat because you're cruising 1.5 miles per gallon, because that's just simply not going to happen. And so the second thing that I want to address was that this test was not perfect. One thing that I failed to address was that when I was running up and down the river, there was wind on this day. So there are some of the, so, you know, one run I'd be running downwind, the next run I'd be running upwind, and that back and forth. And so you'll see when I put up the numbers that there is a little bit, maybe a knot or 2 knots of irregularity that you'll notice from run to run. And that's why. And once I go and put those numbers up, I'll be sure to run through which run was made downwind and which ones were made upwind. And so the last thing is that, you know, this test, while I think it's a great starting point for understanding how this boat's going to perform and the kind of numbers that this hull and engine package can put up and where this boat likes to run, it's not a perfect test. You know, I can tell you right now, I've experienced much different performance, you know, on my crossings back and forth or running it around town. And that has to do with a lot of things. Sea condition, current, wind, the weight on the boat, the weight distribution on the boat, how much fuel I have on board, raw water, fresh water, all that good stuff. And so some people might experience very different numbers, but these are a great starting point to understand kind of where this boat likes to perform. And so without further ado, let me go ahead and throw up the performance numbers on the screen and let's get into it. So here we have the performance numbers that I'm pretty sure most people who watch this video are really looking forward to. And so you can see that in the columns, I have the percent trim, 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. And I addressed earlier in the video why I stopped at 14 and didn't continue on going. And then in the rows, I have my given RPMs, 600, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000, onward to wide open throttle. And you'll see down at the bottom that the 5,500 is blank in most columns. And that is because at low trim, you know, when the motors are really working, they're not able to even do 5,500. And so what I did was in the wide open throttle category, you can see I put the RPMs next to the speeds that I got at wide open throttle. And so you can see 6% is when I first started to hit 5,500 RPM. But because that was so close to wide open throttle, I chose not to record both 5,500 and wide open throttle. And you can see that goes onward all the way to 14% trim. And that's the first trim number where I started to actually differentiate 5,500 to wide open throttle. So I mentioned how some of these runs were upwind and some were downwind, which is why you're kind of going to see a little bit of irregularity in the numbers from column to column. And so I want to differentiate which row is which. Both 0 and 2% trim, those were both done going downwind. 4% was done going upwind, 6% downwind, 8% upwind, 10% downwind, 12% upwind, and then 14% downwind again. So comparing these two charts, the top is the speed in knots at the given trim and RPM, and the bottom is the economy in nautical miles per gallon at the same trim and RPM. You can see that the best cruise that we were able to attain, the best economy at cruise, was 0.75 nautical miles per gallon, and that was done at 10% trim and 4,000 RPM, and we're doing right around 31 knots at that combination of speed and trim. I wish I would have been able to more normalize the running upwind and downwind, because I can tell you from experience for a fact that 8% trim and 4,000 RPM, I am running more efficiently. And you're even able to even go a little bit slower and touch 0.8 nautical miles per gallon if the weight on the boat is right. And so that kind of falls into that position how earlier I was saying that this is not a 100% perfect test, but more so a great starting point. So that's kind of where that is. And another thing I want to say is you can see at max wide open throttle for 14% wide open throttle, we're only doing about 5,800 RPM with 51 knots. Again, I can tell you from experience, if you wide open throttle and jack that trim all the way up to like 20%, you surpass that 6,000 RPM. So the boat is propped correctly. And realistically, you're doing right at about 54 to 55 knots. The fastest we've ever hit was 56 knots, but that was when both the boat and the engines were brand new. 54 to 55 knots is pretty much where you're going to be topping out with an everyday load on this boat. So the last thing that I kind of want to mention about this chart is something that I mentioned earlier, how my favorite fast cruise is kind of between 12 to 14% trim at anywhere between 4,800 to 5,000 RPM. And you can kind of see that on this chart, that at 14% trim and 4,500 RPM, I'm getting 0.71 nautical miles per gallon, which is really good. But at that 12% trim, you can't really see it because I was going upwind. But I can tell you from experience that, at 4,800 RPM and 12%, I'm sitting at 0.7 to 0.71. So really doing, 38 to 40 knots. So realistically, that's going to be your most efficient, fast cruise in the real world. Again, this chart's not really showing that because of the factors that affected my numbers. But realistically, from my experience, 12% at 4,800-ish RPM is going to be a great fast cruise, and the motors and the boat really like sitting there. So I am going to shut up now. If y'all want, you can pause the video and take a look at this chart, screenshot it, save it, whatever you want. If you have any more questions, put them down in the comments. I'll answer every comment. Any question about speed, economy, how the boat handles, the whole 9 yards. I'm here to help and be a resource to all of you guys. So put any questions in the comments and pause the video if you want to look at this chart a little bit more. And so that's really all I have for this video. I have some more stuff coming soon. I have a video on Palm Yachts coming soon. A Bahamas update, which I actually may release before this, we'll find out. And then some other cool stuff. So as I always say, please subscribe, like, and comment. It's a big help to me. And I will see you in the next video.